Hey, and welcome back to Divulgence, everybody. Today it's me and my boy Habsburg Jawlly West. Habsburg, what's going on, man? How are you today?
Doing good, man. How about you?
I'm well. I'm well, thank you. So yeah, man, you've been working your ass off on doing quite a bit of research and prepping up a bunch of information for us. And yeah, today's the day. So the floor is yours, my friend. Excuse me, the floor is yours, my friend. We're going to be touching on, seems like a lot of different topics that'll stem into psychedelics and eugenics. Um, so yeah, man, where would you like to start? Where does your research take us?
Um, I think, first and foremost, I just want to like kind of give a little bit of background for me personally, as we like get into, talking about the subject, for the benefit of anybody who is listening in case, they think that I'm like biased in a certain way or, I have I don't have like a personal experience or like things like this. I uh I have um you know decades of personal psychedelic experience, going back to 1996. I took a my first acid trip. I dedicated a lot of like my time, resources, like personal efforts and energy to like the investigation of these substances, and have not only had hundreds of different trips on different substances. I've manufactured, this is not something I'm actively engaged in, so I think I don't I think I run very little risk by admitting this publicly, but like I have manufactured DMT. I have grown psilocybin mushrooms like on a personal and commercial scale. I have traveled to South America to uh, do participate in ayahuasca dietas in the Amazon jungle, the years before this became like a kind of like a popular thing to do. So my that's our guy. So my point here is to to kind of give my bona fides and say that, like, I have quite a realm of experience before we start like talking about anything that anybody would think that I have like a inherent bias, or that I don't know, like, from a personal experiential level, about these things. But it's something that over the years, like, I have developed a a deeper understanding of the history of these things, and like how they've been used, and what I think that they're being designed to be used for, moving into the future. And so the reason that we sort of like honed in on doing this episode was about a month ago. Of course, and most people are familiar that President Trump issued an executive order about fast tracking, FDA research on psychedelics, including psilocybin and ibogaine. And so it occurred to me that that there was some interesting things regarding like the timing of that announcement, and that relate to some like historical aspects of psychedelics. And so I think that would be a good place to start. Actually, would you want to maybe roll the video of that announcement? It's
I'll pull that up.
maybe like maybe it's like a minute long or something like that. But that the kind of like optics of that whole press conference with Joe Rogan is worth mentioning. um course, he's somebody that's like had a big impact on the culture around psychedelics and so yeah.
I have an NBC kind of
Yeah, I
recap.
mean it's
I think this will give
yeah.
some tips and stuff. If it's not good, I'll pull up something else. Just let me know.
No, you're not hallucinating.
These experimental treatments have shown life-changing potential.
President Trump signed an executive order on Saturday speeding up reviews of certain psychedelic drugs, easing restrictions for medical research on psilocybin or magic mushrooms and ibogaine, a natural psychoactive drug. Even joking he'd be open to trying them.
Can I have some, please? I'll take it.
Popular podcaster Joe Rogan says he helped push the president on the issue.
I sent him that information. The text message came back, sounds great. Do you want FDA approval? Let's do it.
It's a far cry from the 1970s.
I didn't see that
when
part.
Richard Nixon declared
Yeah.
war.
See if there's
in the United.
You want like more of his actual
yeah, what what I was especially wanting was where he's talking about using it to treat like veterans and soldiers and stuff. I think that's the most relevant thing from
Did you say it was like a 1 minute clip? Because I have a 1 minute clip here. I think that.
Yeah, I want to say it was about 1 minute.
Okay.
Something like that.
This one could work then.
We're actually signing the executive order today. It is really a moment. It directs the FDA to expedite their review of certain psychedelics already designated as breakthrough therapy drugs. They're very much being discussed. It's one of the hottest things I think you're talking about, Oz, right? It's nothing. If these turn out to be as good as people are saying, it's going to have a tremendous impact on this country and other countries too. These treatments are currently in the advanced stages of clinical trials to ensure that they're both safe and effective for the American patients. And the nice part is we're actually doing this early, but it has been going on. Research has been going on. Ibogaine, because it's so important, and experienced an 80 to 90% reduction in symptoms of depression and anxiety within 1 month. Can I have some, please? I'll take it. I'll take whatever it takes. I don't have time to be depressed. If you stay busy enough, maybe that works too. That's what I do.
You didn't mention the soldiers in that one.
Okay, I mean I don't know. We probably could find it, but basically in that press conference, like he's basically bragging. A lot of what he's saying is that these things are so effective in treating like post-traumatic stress in soldiers and in veterans, and that's like why he chose to issue the executive order to fast track the research but by the FDA into these substances as to for the benefit of veterans, and so basically that happened on April the 18th of this year, so a little bit more than a month ago. And the interesting thing about the timing of that is that April 19th and April 20th are both days that relate to like psychedelic, psychotropic drug kind of like the celebration or like public consumption of those certain types of drugs that also like correlate with certain events in modern history that are also like very bloody and have resulted in a lot of like mass casualties. And so I think that something that I have speculated on is that these days, April 19th and April 20th, relate to these ancient like Dionysian rituals, Dionysus being like the Greek god of like wine and drunkenness and intoxication. There would be these like springtime festivals. There were, like fertility festivals, bacchanals, where, the communities would engage in, mass scale communal intoxication, from wine, alcohol, but like, whatever drugs were available to them. A lot of these things, we don't know exactly what they were taking, but they were, engaging in like mass scale intoxication, and then like orgiastic like sexual activity. These were fertility rites in the springtime, and these were like attempts to like create communal fertilization. And the other side of that was that there's the Sparagamos ritual that was kind of like the other side of the coin of the bacchanal, which was like a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice. And it would either be like, there would be animal sacrifice, or there would be human sacrifice. And there would actually, typically be a consumption of blood or of the actual flesh of the sacrifice, be it animal or human. And so you had like, this was the kind of like dichotomy of duality of these Dionysian rituals, was you had the, ecstatic intoxication and copulation, and then the like simultaneous spilling of blood and celebration of death. Is this death and rebirth, kind of ritual that's intertwined. Why is that important? Because April 19th, so Trump issues the executive order April 18th, April 19th being Bicycle Day. Bicycle Day is, for those who don't know, is the celebration of the discovery, Albert Hoffman's discovery of LSD in 1943. Albert Hoffman, of course, being a chemist at Sandoz Laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. He was doing research on ergot alkaloids. And in 1938 he synthesized LSD-25. It was the 25th iteration of these lysergamides. And lysergic acid diethylamide is the 25th iteration of lysergic acid diethylamide. And he discovered it in 1938, and didn't do anything with it, as the story goes, until 1943. He like took it off the shelf. He had some type of like intuitive, I don't know, ideation of using this thing for some reason. He gets it, basically the bottle off the shelf. He has some accidental contact with his skin, and feels like above the threshold effects of LSD-25, prompting him a couple days later on April 19th, 1943, to deliberately dose himself with 250 micrograms, which is interesting that he chose like that amount, because that's more or less like an active dose that would be, how would he know? Who knows? But the point is that he took a bicycle ride from Sandoz laboratory to his home, and recorded the effects. And this was like where like psychedelic, modern psychedelic culture came from, is from that day. So this is celebrated basically as a holiday. People all over the world imbibe LSD on Bicycle Day. This is so that's the like bacchanal aspect of it. But then like the Sparagamos aspect of April 19th, I mean, you have had like all of these major many will are maintain that these are like staged sacrificial events. You had the the Waco massacre in 1993, where the ATF, killed 70 something, Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, on April 19th, 1993, April 19th, 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing. And April 19th, 1775 was the shot heard around the world, the start of the American Revolutionary War. So you have these like very, conspicuous, blood sacrifice events that, are happening on April the 19th, which, correlates, with this bicycle day. So, like I think that's demonstrative of this point that there you have this like duality of the Bacchanal and the Sparagamos. The following day is April 20th, of course, is the global celebration day of cannabis consumption. And you also have the the Columbine massacre in 1999, one of the most deadly shooting events, bombing event, whatever exactly happened, one of the most, largest mass casualty events, in American history. You had, it's also Adolf Hitler's birthday, April 20th, and the start of the French Revolutionary War in 1792. So, again, there's this real duality, of the, kind of Bacchanal Sparagamos that relates to April 19th and April 20th. So I think that there was a very, deliberately timed, release of this executive order on April 18th ahead of these two, ceremonial dates that I thought was really interesting and couldn't be ignored. So I think that the other thing is that we are currently obviously like in this military conflict on a global scale, in Iran, also in Eastern Europe, things like this. And, that with Trump basically talking about using, psychedelics for, to treat veterans, which has been like a big push in terms of legitimizing the research around these chemicals, in modern time. Excuse me.
Sorry to interrupt, my friend. I do have, if you do want me to pull it up, I do have the clip when he's talking about.
It couldn't hurt. I mean, it's pretty key to some of these points.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but
No, you're good.
Thought I should let you know that I had it for you. Okay.
Real hero. Today, I'm pleased to announce historic.
I think I have the tab muted. 1 second. Oh, yeah. There.
Reforms to dramatically accelerate access to new medical research and treatments based on psychedelic drugs. In many cases, these experimental treatments have shown life-changing potential for those suffering from severe mental illness and depression, including our cherished veterans. Our veterans are having a tremendous hard time. The suicide rate, we have it down a little bit, but they are having a hard time. And I got a call from a number of people, including the great Joe Rogan. And he said, we have to do something about this. And I looked into it. I called Bobby, I called Oz, I called Marty and Jay, and it was uniform support. And I said, so why would we wait 3 or 4 years to get it done? Or 10 years, frankly. Let's get it done immediately. And that's what happened. It's probably never been anything happened so quickly. Everybody is so strongly in favor of this. It's it's for a lot of people, but it's for our military in particular. The suicide epidemic among veterans is a national tragedy. Since 9/11, we've lost over 21 times more veterans.
That's fine. We can cut it off there.
That's good. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Basically the point that I was trying to
Think of
make
that.
here is that
21 times more. And today we're
Sorry, just close.
bringing them new hope. I think you're going to see
I've heard enough of this guy.
reduction in that number.
Yeah, sorry. YouTube's giving me there we go. I don't know why
No, it's
YouTube's
good.
giving me a hard time.
But basically, like the thing that that strikes me about that is using this to basically say, like, we're going to use this to treat soldiers for PTSD from like the horrors of war, instead of saying, like, we're going to not be engaged in war, we're going to treat oh, Anna, thanks for joining us, really appreciate it, good to see you. Instead of saying we're not going to engage in war, it's we're going to keep soldiers from feeling remorse, from feeling depression, from their engagement in wars. We're gonna try to use these drugs to assuage their guilt, their shame, their remorse, their depression, their suicidal ideation from having like committed atrocities in war. And to be able to like say, well, this is a way to create like stronger soldiers to that don't have these kinds of like compunctions of about their activities on the battlefield, or like somebody gets like shell and we talked about like the first time we ever chatted that Tavistock Institute, like it started as a means of treating shell shock in World War I, and how to like take veterans off the battlefield and to like treat their their condition of feeling like these horrors, experiences, from killing and witnessing killing and things like this. So to me, like what the subtext here is like we're going to make soldiers that are immune to these atrocities by giving them these drugs. And I think that when we look at who is largely behind a lot of these companies that are looking to capitalize on these drugs and on these trials that are being greenlit with the FDA, you have companies like A-Type Life Sciences and Compass Pathways. These are largely funded by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, of course, being like the like the at the very like top of the hierarchy of the military industrial complex, private intelligence gathering to data collection to fuel these military technologies, be it like Palantir, be it Anduril. And he's the one who like is personally investing in backing these companies. And so, and obviously Peter Thiel himself is like really into transhumanism. The guy who started ATI Life Sciences, Christian Angermeyer, is a German entrepreneur, is also a major transhumanist. He started these enhanced games, right? So where people with
He's the one who started that.
He's the one who started it.
Oh,
yeah. So
that's supposed to be. Is that still supposed to be this year, or is it 2008?
I know. I think it's happening. I think it's happening really soon. I could be wrong about that. But so you look and you see, so like the people that are involved in in these clinical trials that this executive order is going to be enabling, these companies, these are private for-profit companies, and they're being backed by these transhumanists who like have deep connections with the military industrial complex, DARPA,
today,
CIA, it was today. There you go.
Wow.
I knew it was
Crazy.
happening right around now.
Crazy.
Right. So that's Christian Angermeyer.
Okay.
And so you have like a lot of these people that are involved in like the MAHA, I mean, obviously RFK, has been vocal about his support for the psychedelics and stuff, but one of his like undersecretaries is Callie Means, who you may or may not be familiar with, but he's a graduate of Stanford and Harvard. His sister Casey Means is also a Stanford graduate. Of course, Peter Thiel went to Stanford. Stanford being like one of the epicenters of Stanford, Silicon Valley being one of the epicenters of psychedelic research and culture in the United States, of course. But Callie Means, and he's been like heavily promoted by Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, all these people, and he has been for years like on his Twitter feed shilling for ATI and Compass Pathways like as a investment vehicle. So these guys are that are involved in MAHA and involved in like the national the NIH and all of the like the federal regulatory organizations are personally invested and personally like promoting these drugs too. So, and another interesting thing is as regards like, federal agencies, the FDA approved ketamine therapy for depression on the same day that Trump was inaugurated in 2025. And it's actually a nasal spray called, I think, Spravato, I think, something like that, by Johnson and Johnson, who of course was manufacturing the C19 jabs that were also fast tracked through or circumventing FDA approval by Trump's executive order 6 years ago for Operation Warp Speed. So to me, I see this like very definite parallel between not just like the manufacturers that are producing these drugs, the like executive orders, the circumventing traditional like pathways for FDA approval, things like that, to what we saw with the C19. I don't know what we can and can't say, so I'll call it C19. Does that work? Right?
Sure.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
I don't want to get us censored or anything. So basically, like that being kind of like the impetus of what happened recently to why, well, I thought we should start having this conversation, and basically where where do these like where do these drugs come from? In obviously like in ancient times, these substances have been used. We discussed like the Dionysian rituals, but like in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, we're talking about the Mayan cultures, the Aztec cultures, the Incan cultures. All of them used psychedelics ceremonially, but also very conspicuously in correlation with human ritual sacrifice. So in the Aztec culture, the priest class, they would consume both psilocybin mushrooms as well as morning glory seeds, which contain LSA, which is lysergic acid, which is is what LSD is derived from.
Okay.
And they would like engage in these like very bloody sacrifice rituals, and that they're the psychedelics, these tryptamine compound psychedelics, are a very prominent part of yes, exactly. Adam just pointed to something. We're going to get into that too. but yeah, Elon Musk is a big proponent of ketamine, and he's also a big supporter of MAPS. A financial supporter. Ketamine is definitely like one of these drugs that Compass Pathways is really involved in promoting and producing. So, but yeah, basically, in Mesoamerica, you also had the Mayan cultures. The Mayan priest class also, would specifically consume psilocybin mushrooms during these like human sacrifice rituals. They also like, in Incan civilization, which is more like in Peru, they were giving these the tryptamines, DMT, ayahuasca to the victims of the sacrifice. So it's not necessarily that they're priests who are performing the sacrifice, like in the Mayan and Aztec cultures were consuming them, but they were giving them to the actual victims. And we know this because we have like recently discovered, like the remains of sacrificed children from Incan burial sites that were that had the ayahuasca compounds in the bodies. And so what's really interesting about that is specifically with giving it to like the ritual sacrifice victims, is that like we are seeing a lot of studies that actually precede this executive order and the FDA approval stuff, designed by like Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, that relate. They're one of the only institutions that has been doing long-term trials on psilocybin, and specifically as relates with end-of-life anxiety. So one of the things that they're studying is giving mushrooms to people with like stage 4 cancer, and demonstrating that it like relieves these people of end-of-life anxiety around death. And so when you talk about like kind of like ritual sacrifice and things like this, it gets into, now we have like state supported, doctor assisted life terminations, suicide, whatever, like the MAID program up in Canada. And what's really interesting is, so you have these have you seen the it's a fashion company. Have you seen this ad? It's for Simon's Fashion. It's called All Is Beauty, and I don't know what this fashion company actually like has to do with like promoting MAID, but they have made this whole like commercial, and it's it's about like this woman at like the end of her life. She's choosing to do MAID, and they're doing like an ayahuasca ceremony on the beach, but they also have this like weird blue whale thing. It's like some kind of weird sculpture in this video, and so it's pretty obvious that they're like promoting MAID with like the optics of like these ayahuasca ceremonies, and actually the blue whale, is that something that you can pull up? The video is probably too long to show, but maybe there are like some stills from it. It's called All Is Beauty. It's this thing. Yeah. And basically, yeah, if you just want to like run that with the sound off, like we can just kind of like keep that up.
Cool.
But you'll see, right here, it's this woman, and it cuts to like the beach, and then later on in this commercial, she's like doing a ayahuasca ceremony with her people, and this right here that shows this blue whale. Well, what's really strange about this is there is this blue whale challenge. Is this something that you've heard of?
Yeah.
There's like an internet thing where it's like, oh, in 50 days you people are challenged to like progressively commit acts of like self-harm, ultimately like resulting in a suicide on the 50th day. So what I guess what I'm trying to like point to here is it seems to me like that there is a lot of like propaganda and a lot of work to justify using psychedelics to condition people towards like being comfortable with either being sacrificed or taking their own lives. So I think that the speaks to kind of like this eugenic agenda, that eugenic Malthusian agenda, depopulation, what have you. And you have like people like the Huxleys, who have been like historically really key to the Huxley family is key to like kind of promoting Darwinian concepts, Malthusian concepts, eugenic concepts, and transhumanism, and also like really being like the originators of like psychedelic culture, with Aldous Huxley, his Doors of Perception, but prior to that, like Brave New World in 1932, right? And so what's really interesting about that is you had Aldous Huxley and his brother Julian Huxley, obviously, who was the president of the British Eugenics Society. He coined the term transhumanism. Julian Huxley.
He coined it. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, he literally came up with that term in 1957. I believe 57. And he founded UNESCO, the World Wildlife Fund, the World Wildlife Fund. He's hardcore eugenicist. He is a fellow of the Royal Society. Well, their grandfather, Thomas Huxley, was a fellow of the Royal Society, and he is known as Darwin's bulldog. And so he was really like the person, and for those who don't know, the Royal Society is the longest running like academy of sciences in the world. It's basically like under the auspices of like the British monarchy, and it is like it's really the establishment of science. When they talk about like trust the science, that it's the Royal Society. They are like the gatekeeper. They are like the arbiter of what is like scientifically acceptable in the establishment. And it goes back, the organization goes back to the 1600s. And it was originally founded as the Invisible College. And what's interesting about that is that, the Invisible College is a term that, the Rosicrucians used to describe, their organization. And of course, the Royal Society was founded by a group of Rosicrucians, Freemasons, people that are, involved in occultism, alchemy. And that's the foundation of like modern sciences was in these like alchemical pursuits. So the Royal Society is really like spawned out of these occult secret societies, and you had in the 1800s Thomas Huxley, who he was he founded a group called the X Club, and this was 9 of his fellows, and they basically it was like a supper club that met monthly before they would go to their meetings at the Royal Society, and they essentially like conspired to take over the Royal Society, and they reformed the Royal Society. Thomas Huxley became the president of the Royal Society, and basically they brought in and his philosophy was that science would become a substitute for Christianity, for religion. That science would become the people's religion, and he was kind of like a proponent of like spiritual eugenics, and he was deeply invested in like Malthusianism. He preached sexual austerity for the working class based on Malthusian theories, and he was really like the one who brought Darwin's theories to the public and championed them. He was called Darwin's bulldog, and is really the reason why we have that as like the prevailing model, and because of through his kind of takeover of the Royal Society, that became like the model. They gave Darwin the Copley Award, the Copley Medal. That's when they started Nature magazine. I mean, to
Oh.
promote. Yeah, the Royal Society publishes Nature magazine, and to promote like Darwinism. And of course, like Charles Darwin's cousin was Francis Galton, who invented eugenics. And so they of course, like the two theories go largely hand in hand. And you also had the aspect of like social Darwinism being like eugenics, and saying that like certain groups in society, certain racial groups, certain genetic groups of people with certain types of conditions were basically like a burden on the human race, and that through forced sterilization, through through which would be an example of negative eugenics. An example of positive eugenics would be like controlled breeding, which is something that like the Nazis were involved in, with like the Lebensborn facilities and stuff like this, where they were like actively promoting positive eugenics of like breeding between like people of preferred genetic stock to perpetuate the human race. So basically this was this is like what the the Huxley family was really deeply invested in promoting through like the scientific establishment, was social Darwinism, eugenics, Darwinian evolution, blah blah. Thomas Huxley, was went on to become like a mentor to H.G. Wells, who was one of the founders of the Fabian Society, and along with a bunch of other eugenicists like George Bernard Shaw, Bertrand Russell. The Fabian Society, as you may or may not be aware, is a social engineering group in England that's heavily tied in with like these Rhodes and Milner round table groups, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIAA, Chatham House, basically like this social engineering component that is a counterpart to the Royal Society, that is the scientific aspect of these groups. So and of course H.G. Wells wrote like The War of the Worlds and all this propaganda about the New World Order, the open conspiracy, all these things, but a lot of it had to do with alien invasion. So again, this is something that I'm seeing a lot of crossover with the like UFO disclosure, stuff about aliens in regards to like psychedelics. I think that this is something that is like a feature of psychedelics, is that with these compounds, they are an interface for certain types of entities. Like it's almost a ubiquitous experience for people that have like high doses of DMT, of ayahuasca, of other, tryptamines, to encounter entities, aliens, whatever. So I think that, now that we're having, all of this UFO disclosure at the same time as, bringing these, psychedelics into, increased like legal status, that there's like a crossover. So getting into the Royal Society again, this is like kind of a real incubator of the whole like LSD and ergot research, and predating Hoffman's discovery at Sandoz in his synthesis in 38, the discovery in 43. And I think that this is really, really interesting. And I think that, that this goes, that there's a lot of evidence that this is a project that they were working on through the Royal Society long term, and that it was being disseminated through like literature, through propaganda through literature, and that there's some really interesting connections. So where did all of this start? Arthur Stoll was a biochemist. He is Swiss. And he was Albert Hoffman's like mentor and director at Sandoz. He was a graduate of Ingolstadt, it's the University of Munich now, but it was Ingolstadt University, which is actually where Adam Weishaupt was on faculty when he founded the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776.
Interesting, man.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah,
because there are actually other people involved in this, that were graduates and faculty members at Ingolstadt. But basically, Arthur Stoll performed the first isolation of ergot alkaloids. He, was the first person to create ergotamine, which is like, necessary, or in like the most common LSD synthesis is, ergotamine is your precursor, ergotamine tartrate. And so when he was doing this research, Arthur Stoll, he got through Sandoz, they financed the production on a mass scale of ergot fungus. And for those who don't know, ergot fungus is it's a blight on wheat or rye. So what it is it's actually like a fungus that produces a mushroom fruiting body that infects wheat, rye, certain types of grasses, but basically like mostly like edible grains. And that's why you have, these reports going back through antiquity of like St. Anthony's fire, of, people who have consumed ergotized, grains, and have had like these, psychotic episodes, whatever, documented.
right.
They said that, a lot of the like witchcraft trials like in Salem and stuff, were predicated on,
Yes.
episodes of ergotism, of, people like consuming ergotized, grains, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and having these effects. So what's really interesting is that like Sandoz actually, so they were involved, going back to the 1920s, in a region of Switzerland called Emmental, which is actually where like Swiss cheese comes from, Emmentaler.
Oh, yeah.
Just whatever. But they were producing ergot on a mass scale, so they were like giving farmers, they're subsidizing their crops and giving them money to deliberately infect their grain and rye crops with ergot fungus.
Oh, okay.
And of course, Arthur Stoll was a fellow of the Royal Society, and at the time, Sandoz became part. It was part of like, so all of these chemical companies in Europe were like forming these cartels. They called them cartels, and so there were like 4 companies in Switzerland that formed is called the Basel cartel, and it was Sandoz, Geigy, Siba. I don't know. There are a couple more, but they joined in they called it the quadripartite cartel with IG Farben, which was the German cartel, the chemical cartel, and this is going back to 1929. Like between 1929 and 1932, this quadripartite cartel was formed between the Basel cartel in Switzerland, IG Farben in Germany, and certain like British and French chemical corporations, and it was basically like the quadripartite cartel was in existence until 1939, which is when but before World War II started, and these other companies in the cartel like disassociated themselves from IG Farben because of IG Farben was essentially like the industrial backbone of the Nazi party.
Yeah.
Okay, and and they were using like these concentration camps for forced labor to create their products. They were using they were developing these nerve gas agents. They were actually developing them as pesticides originally.
Have
Auto-
you, sorry to interrupt, have you,
No, go ahead.
just because we're talking about IG Farben and drugs and stuff, have you ever read the book? I forget the author's name, but have you read the book Blitzed?
Actually, I haven't, but I am aware of it, and I think that there's definitely some stuff that's in that book that
Highly
is
recommend that. Yeah.
yeah. Do you have that? Can you show me the cover of it? I think I know which one you're talking about. Anyways,
Yeah, I'll find it. Yeah.
anyway, point being that like IG Farben was involved directly with Sandoz, and so you had this like cross pollination between like what became the Nazis industrial cartel, and the organization in Basel that was doing all of this work to develop the Ergot based drugs. Of course, Arthur Stoll being a member of the Royal Society, and another very like prominent biochemist was Max Perutz. Max Perutz, was he was into like crystallography and okay, all right, that's not the one I was thinking of, but I am aware of this, and I know this guy Norman Ohler. Okay, so yeah, so basically Max Perutz, what's interesting about him, he was a fellow of the Royal Society. He was like the doctoral advisor to Francis Crick, who ultimately like discovered the double helix nature of DNA while on a LSD trip in the 1950s.
What?
Yeah. And so, yeah, well, so Perutz's first cousin was a guy named Leo Perutz. Leo Perutz wrote a book in 1933 that this is an interesting one. It's a really short novel. And, if you're interested, it's a pretty good read. He wrote this book in 1933 called St. Peter's Snow. And the book is about a German noble baron outside of Berlin who recruits chemists to come to his like estate, in the country and take like ergot, like I mean it's not like specifically called ergot fungus in the book, but they call it St. Peter's Snow, but it's it's a wheat blight, and to use it to create this like this book, this psychotropic like drug. This is fully 10 years before LSD was discovered. It was 5 years before it was synthesized, 10 years before it was discovered by Albert Hoffman. And just by some crazy coincidence, this guy wrote this whole book about how this German noble was using scientists to develop this drug so that he could give it to his people, to the people that lived and worked on his lands, to like engender their loyalty by like brainwashing them. Ultimately it had like the opposite effect and they rebelled, but this is kind of this dual nature of what these psychedelics do. Do they engender loyalty and compliance, or do they engender like rebellion and uprising, or both? And so so Max Perutz, Leo Perutz's first cousin, was a fellow of the Royal Society with Arthur Stoll, who was doing all the ergot research at Sandoz at the same time that Leo Perutz is writing this book. So it's just like, that can't be a coincidence. The implication here is that this was something that was like circulating in the Royal Society. They were like actively working to develop these drugs. This was and they were using like propaganda to like put these notions into like the public consciousness. At the same time, the year before St. Peter's Snow was released, Brave New World was published. And of course, also Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley, was a fellow of the Royal Society. Their grandfather was the president of the Royal Society. So of course, in Brave New World, it's called Soma, and it has these various properties of like keeping people in a psychological prison without bars. They're content, they're able to be controlled. There's also a religious component, like the Soma is like their religion, and they engage in orgies. That's this Dionysian bacchanal that we were talking about before. At the same time, the book is about eugenic engineering, right? And using like creating like a hierarchy of human beings based on like predetermined genetic outcomes, so you really have all of these subjects contained in Brave New World, in St. Peter's Snow, coming out in 1932 and 1933, like a decade before Bicycle Day. You have the familial connections between the people that are writing these books and the Royal Society. And so I think it stands to reason. And the Royal Society being also this incubator of all of the like genetic eugenic research and theories becoming like mainstream 100 years before that. So you have Arthur Stoll's son, though, was Werner Stoll, and he was a psychiatrist. And so he was the first person to publish scientific literature about LSD with Albert Hoffman. And he actually like gives Werner Stoll gives LSD to for goodness sake, Richard Kuhn, who was a Nazi biochemist, who was getting ergotamine and LSD from Sandoz via Werner Stoll as early as 1943, like literally the year that Albert Hoffman made his discovery on Bicycle Day. It went directly to the Nazis. They were the first to get their hands on it. We know that even before this, that a German psychiatrist, a like very renowned psychiatrist who also was a graduate and professor of at Ingolstadt University, University of Munich, Ingolstadt University, like Arthur Stoll. I don't know if he and Arthur Stoll were there at the same time. I don't doubt that they were. His name is Emil Kraepelin, and he was heavy into eugenics and social Darwinism from a psychiatric, psychological perspective, and a lot of like his research and his writings really influenced like Hitler and Himmler and the Nazis in developing like their theories on race and eugenics that came from Emil Kraepelin, and he was the first person to use mescaline in psychotherapy. So like this is yeah. So this is like this kind of like lineage, yeah, using again like people using this these psychedelic drugs in combination with psychiatry, but also people that have these like very specific eugenic ideations and leanings that are using these things now. Kraepelin was getting, I believe, the mescaline for his studies from Park Davis, I believe, because they were the first to actually extract mescaline from peyote. It is a pharmaceutical company in Detroit, in the United States. And going back to 1887, they actually began like distributing via the mail dried peyote buttons. And I'm not sure exactly like the origin of why they were, selling peyote through the mail, but they got involved in extracting mescaline and making like the first actual like um you know like like specific mescaline concoctions available, and this company went on to like in the 50s to develop PCP and also ketamine, which is actually derived from PCP. And Park Davis is currently owned by Pfizer. Just saying.
Okay.
Yes.
Of course.
Right.
Quick
No, go
question.
ahead. Yeah.
I don't think I know the answer to this. What is a peyote button and how is it taken? Is it
Okay.
like a yeah?
So
Go for it.
peyote is Lophophora williamsii. It's a Lophophora cactus. It's native to like the southwestern deserts in the United States and Mexico, like in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, like northern Mexico, and it's a heavily like mescaline bearing cactus, but there are a lot of other cacti that are mescaline bearing, that are Trichoceros is the genus. So those are like your San Pedro cacti, right? So you can extract mescaline, pure mescaline from peyote. You can also extract it from Trichoceros from San Pedro. And basically, you had so okay, all right. So this is really interesting too. Did that kind of answer the question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
Yes. But how do you? I don't think you answered the second part. How is it taken? Is it ingested? Like, is it?
Yeah.
Is it processed into some pill or like a powder or a liquid?
So traditionally, like in native cultures, they like you would actually eat the buttons. Although it can also be prepared into like a decoction. It can be like turned into like a excuse me, like a liquid preparation. And
so what do you mean by a button? Is that like something that grows
okay,
off?
so the cactus is like a round little like stumpy cactus like this, and when it dries up, it results in like a little
Oh.
disc, like a little
Oh.
flat disc is
Oh,
what
okay.
the actual, cactus reduces
Okay.
to when it's
I
dried out.
got
And,
you.
and so it's a button.
Okay.
And that's what you refer to as a peyote button. So Aleister Crowley in 1907 actually got mescaline directly from Park Davis. And so this is, Aleister Crowley is doing, all these, rituals, of course, he's also, involved in, like weird things that really relate to like eugenic engineering, doing these like writing about doing these like moonchild rituals, basically that that there are like spirits that influence our like evolution on a genetic basis, as regards to like creating a race of super beings. So they're like aliens, and there's these aliens or spirits are fulfilling these like eugenic aspirations to create like human super beings. Like this is what Aleister Crowley was into, of course, and he was channeling all of these entities, things like Aiwas, Coranzon, Lamb, who famously looks just like our depictions of gray aliens. So again, we're talking about this like convergence of these like psychedelic drugs, rituals, and aliens. So Crowley was in Berlin in the 30s. He spent like years in Berlin. He was absolutely like in personal contact with Hitler and Himmler and a lot of the like the higher ups in the Nazi party. We don't we can only speculate on what he was advising them on, but Aldous Huxley actually had a like personal meeting with Aleister Crowley in Berlin in 1930, like a year before. Yeah, a year before he published he wrote Brave New World, 2 years before it was published. So we can only speculate, but what was Crowley telling Huxley about mescaline? I mean, allegedly, Huxley didn't try mescaline personally until years later when he wrote Doors of Perception. But what did he know? Like had he consumed mescaline? Had he consumed ergot? Preparations. I mean, who knows? He wrote Brave New World. Like I said, it's just so like on the nose with so many of these other things. His affiliations to the Royal Society and connections that that would connect him to Arthur Stoll and Sandoz, Aleister Crowley and Park Davis. Like, it's really crazy. So then as regards like mescaline, we know for a fact too, and who knows to what degree like Crowley actually was involved with this, but that they were using mescaline specifically in experiments on prisoners in Dachau and Auschwitz. Kurt Plotner was running these experiments at Dachau, and he was an SS officer who was initiated by Heinrich Himmler. And he actually, was affiliated with Leipzig University, which is where Emil Kraepelin, again, the first person to administer mescaline, for psychotherapy, that was his alma mater also. So there seem to be these like institutional connections between these guys and using this stuff, of course, like in Dachau and Auschwitz, and they were specifically using these to to torture people, to use them like as truth serums, as mind control, conduits for mind control, things like this. So like legitimate torture implements. But we know that there was let's see. Now we're kind of getting into probably a lot of stuff that's like covered in that Blitzed book, I'm guessing, if any of this sounds familiar.
Okay.
But you have like you know General Charles Lukes, he goes over to Switzerland. He meets with Richard Kuhn, who is the Nazi biochemist, who is the chemical warfare specialist for IG Farben. He meets with him and Werner Stoll, Arthur Stoll's son, in Switzerland in 1948, and gets LSD and brings it back to the United States. And like that's, it starts with like this Project Charter, but eventually it like morphs into Project Artichoke and MK Ultra. And so now we're getting into after the war, of course. And you had you also had so for example, Alan Dulles, who was, he and his brother John Foster Dulles were, partners at Sullivan and Cromwell, a law firm who actually, worked on behalf of IG Farben, was one of their clients. And then, Alan Dulles was actually operating, for the OSS in Switzerland, at the same time that Sandoz was doing all of this work on LSD, and with actually like in partnership with IG Farben. So obviously, like when Alan Dulles becomes head of the CIA in the 50s, he's integral in bringing a lot of these drugs into the MK Ultra projects and to like implementing them. And of course we're talking about a widespread program. I don't think I have to like explain what MK Ultra is. I think most people watching this are familiar to some degree, right? But we're talking about like a broad range of mind control experiments that not limited to psychedelics, but like heavily involved psychedelics. And one of one of the eventually they actually got cut. The CIA got cut off by Sandoz. They said, you're buying too much of this. They were trying to essentially buy like their entire supply, and they said, we don't feel comfortable selling all of this to you. And eventually they contracted with Eli Lilly, who to produce. Oh, thanks, Adam. Appreciate you, bro. They contracted with Eli Lilly, it was a major pharmaceutical, company in Indianapolis, to begin producing LSD domestically for the CIA. And it was actually Ed Cornfield was the head chemist on this project. And Eli Lilly actually published the formula for LSD, and that is how Owsley Stanley got the formula. At Berkeley, it was like available to him at the University of California. What's interesting is Ed Cornfield, he mentored David Nichols. David Nichols is like big, in like the modern, psychedelic, as a chemist in the modern, psychedelic scene. He's, big, fellow of the Hefter Institute, which is, actually based in Santa Fe, really close to Santa Fe Institute, Zorro Ranch. Like a lot. Hefter is named for the person who discovered mescaline. He was another German scientist back in the 1800s. But anyways, yeah, David Nichols, he's synthesized MDMA for MAPS for their clinical studies, DMT for Rick Strassman's spirit molecule studies. And the spirit molecule studies are interesting. I mean, that they weren't called spirit molecule studies, but they were, his research on DMT that Rick Strassman performed in the 1980s, and they were the first like government sanctioned psychedelic studies since like the 1950s, 60s, something like that. And this was in the 1980s at the University of New Mexico. And it was actually underwritten, like he was funded to do his DMT research by the Scottish Rite a foundation for like schizophrenic studies. So this is really weird. Like, why would the Freemasons be funding Rick Strassman's DMT research? It's this. These are questions that we want to ask. It's really wild stuff. But like as regards MDMA, MDMA was created in 1912 in Germany, of course. At Merck, Merck being like a pharmaceutical chemical company that goes back to like the 1600s. It's one of the oldest or the oldest pharmaceutical company in the world. And they obviously weren't part of the IG Farben cartel, but definitely were involved with the Nazi Party in a direct way. They're one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world still, and they published their formula for MDMA, and it was synthesized in the 60s by Alexander Shulgin, and that's like when it became popularized. So let's kind of like talk about him, because I think we touched on him in the first episode that you and I did last fall, when we were talking about Grateful Dead and Tavistock and stuff. But Alexander Shulgin, and sorry, it's there's a lot of jumping around in this, but all these people relate, and
Yeah,
it's all pretty integrated. But
and sorry, I definitely you mentioned our first episode together. I forget the number, but highly recommend people go and check that out, because you did a really good job in there, and you dropped a lot of good stuff, and a lot of it connects,
relates to this. Yeah. And so that's why it's cool to be able to like do this now, and kind of expand on it. So basically, Alexander Shulgin is in many ways like the key figure when it comes to like psychedelic drugs and research, and like the actual like promulgation of these drugs and like the invention of them, because he has invented almost all of the psychedelic drugs that exist, with the exception of things like mescaline, LSD, MDMA, things that either like existed prior to the 1950s, or things that are like compounds that are found immediately in nature. I mean, he invented literally every tryptamine, every phenylethylamine that pretty much exists, right? And
Wow.
and he has published the books, PCal and TCal, which are phenylethylamines I have known and loved, and tryptamines I have known and loved. So those are the two basic categories of psychedelic drugs. The phenylethylamines being kind of the class of drugs that would include MDMA and mescaline and MDA, things that are more similar to like amphetamine, kind of like compounds, and tryptamine. And so that also includes like he created like all the 2C compounds. So 2CI, 2CB, all of these things. There's a big series of them. He created all of them. And the tryptamines are going to be like lysergic acid, like LSD, but like LSA, any of those compounds, psilocybin, psilocin, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, any of those things, right? So those are all like tryptamines and phenylethylamine. So those are like your two basic categories. Everything that pretty much is like a what would be categorized as a psychedelic falls into one of those categories. And like I said, he published these books. It's something that you can actually buy if you wanted to actually like produce any of these things, like and Alexander Shulgin had a DEA license for years, and he's been a consultant to he died in 2014, but he's been a consultant directly to the DEA on like every matter relating to psychedelics for decades. and he actually got his DEA license revoked in, I think, 1993 or 1994, because at all of these like illicit drug laboratories, they found his books, and they were like, all right, dude, it's a bad look for us. Oh, I mean, like
No.
every single bust, everybody was using, like P-Cal and T-Cal as like a cookbook. And, like, I think that's the
wild.
intent. Yeah. Well, and Alexander Shulgin, of course, like we talked about before, this guy is like a member, for like 4 decades, a member of the Bohemian Club and going to the Bohemian Grove, and like, what are they doing out there? Like, oh, gee, who knows? Maybe some weird, rituals with, with these things, and burning effigies, and baby sacrifice, blah blah blah. We know about this stuff. But Shulgin, it's very, very interesting. Like his origins are with the Dow Chemical Company. He went to Harvard, so and of course, like Harvard is where a lot of these people, Rick Doblin, who founded MAPS, Leonard Picard, who was like maybe the most prolific acid chemist, in history, up through like the year 2000 when he got busted. He They both went to the Kennedy School of Government. Rick Doblin and Leonard Picard both went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Of course, they both were like very, very close with Sasha Shulgin, and would go to these like Friday night dinners that the Shulgins would host at their property in Lafayette, California, like outside of Berkeley, in the East Bay, every Friday night. And, all kinds of, people would go to these, including Buzz Aldrin, which I think, I can't remember if we talked about this or not on a show, but I think we've talked about it privately. Like, why in the heck was Buzz Aldrin, the 33rd degree, Scottish Rite Freemason, astronaut, second, man to allegedly walk on the moon, going and hanging out at Sasha Shulgin's farm every Friday night with Rick Doblin and Leonard Picard and all these, people, including John Weir Perry, another guy that I'll try to get into before we run out of time. I know this is, maybe going a little bit long, but
no, man, take your time, do what you got to do, buddy.
I'm trying. So Sasha Shulgin started out his career after Harvard in the 50s with Dow Chemical. Dow being like, it was formerly like a totally private family-owned company. It has now merged with DuPont, which is, another exactly. Adam nailed it with Picard. We should do an episode about that. It is totally crazy, that whole story. Picard and Todd Gordon Skinner, and it was actually Todd Gordon Skinner's girlfriend, this Crystal, whatever her name is, that made the neural soup videos that snitched on them. But it's a crazy story. And actually, what's really interesting too is before they were manufacturing the acid in Kansas in the missile silo, he had labs like in Mountain View, like literally next door to like Google's headquarters campus, like in Mountain View, California. That's where he was cooking the acid. Literally like right next to Alpha. It's called Alphabet, right? And also the NASA Ames Research Center, which is like one of the biggest NASA facilities, is right next to Google, is right next to where Leonard Picard was cooking all the acid. Like, it's,
why not, right?
Why not? It's over the top. But yeah, so you had Shulgin was working for Dow, and it was a family company. The Dow family itself, actually, and I think that I mentioned this at some point, but they were the biggest funders of the Interlochen Academy, which is where Jeffrey Epstein actually, it's a music performance academy for kids in the summer who are like precocious musicians, and they get these like scholarships and spend the whole summer there. Jeffrey Epstein was an Interlochen student in the 60s, and he actually became one of their like big benefactors, and he had his own like cabin at interleukin that he had, you know, donated all this money for. And that was like, as you know, the record goes, according to Ghislaine Maxwell, that's where he and Epstein and Maxwell recruited their first victim, was at Interlaken in 1993. So the Dow family, who owned Dow Chemical, actually was, you know, like, they're the biggest benefactor of Interlaken. So that's another interesting point. Their name is on like every building there. They've given all the money, millions and millions and millions of dollars over the years. And the Dow Chemical Company was actually involved in like a cartel of sorts with IG Farben, you know, pre-World War II, where they were actually doing, like, it was a price fixing scheme between Dow Chemical, Alcoa, who is like a metals company. They're involved in mining and refining, gigantic, and IG Farben. And what they were doing was, you know, Dow Chemical had invented a process to get magnesium out of seawater. And so they were able to be producing all of this magnesium, in a novel way for like very cheap. And they set the price for IG Farben to be using for, you know, to produce, you know, goods and weapons and equipment for the Nazis at like a significantly lower rate than what they were selling it for in the United States. Like, they were undercutting their price here. They had a contract, you know, like a monopoly with IG Farben. They had a monopoly on magnesium, and they had this deal with IG Farben where they were selling it to them way below what they were selling it in the United States and Britain for. You know, like it was a pretty big deal. They got in big trouble for that. And actually, like, this all came up like at the Nuremberg trials and all this stuff. And yeah. And of course, you know, you had Otto Ambros was, you know, the most prominent chemist at IG Farben. He was involved in developing the sarin gas, Tabin, Zyklon B, you know, all of these things that, you know, were these, you know, deadly nerve agents that, you know, that they were able to, you know, kill a lot of people with. And they were developed originally as insecticides, as pesticides, right? And what they discovered was that these things are not only like so effective as insecticides at such low doses that like they're really like they're really like, you know, too powerful to be used on insects, because, you know, they're so deadly, but they were really good for killing larger organisms like humans. So anyways, Otto Ambros, he did get convicted at Nuremberg, and, you know, was served like 8 years for, you know, these insane crimes against humanity. You know, so, but he was out of you know, jail like in the early 50s, you know, in the early 50s. And he came over to the United States on Dow's dime. He became like a long-term consultant for Dow Chemical. And well, who was working for Dow Chemical at that time? Alexander Shulgin. It's a really interesting coincidence, because what did Alexander Shulgin make at Dow that became like, you know, his signature product? It was an insecticide, a pesticide called Zactrin, and it was so successful. You know, and who knows? You know, I mean, it's not like written, you know, that's what happened, but, you know, there's, you know, probably a pretty good chance that he was working with Otto Ambros, you know, to develop Zactrin, I think. But then, you know, what's really interesting is, as soon as he, you know, became very successful with Dow, you know, for Zactrin, they said, all right, we're going to give you, like, basically, you know, this was a huge hit. You made us a lot of money, and now we're going to let you do whatever you want, and, you know, give you the money and give you the resources. And for some reason, what does Shulgin say? He's like, oh, I want to, you know, start making psychedelic drugs. So the first thing he goes from the pesticides, like the IG Farben, pesticides to the IG Farben psychedelic. There is this continuity, is what I'm saying. And so he invents this thing called STP, which is like it's like an amphetamine based phenylethylamine, but they would like pass it off as like acid back in the 60s. And so like a lot of these like acid casualties, like in the Haight-Ashbury, and like at these big festivals, like, the brown acid at Woodstock and stuff, it was STP. And that's what people were like freaking out on really bad. And it, was really weaponized. And you could say like, oh, there's some plausible deniability with Shulgin, like he didn't, know how it was going to be used, and that there were people like, Owsley Stanley and, these, illicit chemists, who underground chemists who were making it based off of his formulations and stuff like this. But, like, I tend to think that it was something that he conceived of in a very deliberate way, and that, like knew, what the potential, effects were, and that this was something that, like, was heavily weaponized. And so a lot of the like the bad trips in the 60s were STP, that people thought that they were taking LSD, and it wasn't. So eventually, there's kind of like a little too much like publicity about this stuff for Dow, and so Dow lets him go. And then he's just like making all of this stuff at his private laboratory in Lafayette in California. The laboratories still exist. They're still using it for research. The Shulgin Foundation, it's being run by this guy named Paul Daly, who is like a former intelligence officer for the Church of Scientology. Really interesting. I think we talked about this at one point, but that he came up in the Epstein files. He was in communication with Paul Krasner, real creepy figure who was like prominent in these psychedelic circles too, who was a close friend of Epstein. And Paul Daly was telling him that he was actually, being commissioned by the Church of Scientology's intelligence office to spy on him while he was, working for Sasha Shulgin. Very, very crazy stuff. He is now running the Shulgin Foundation's like research arm, but yeah, like he was working, as Sasha Shulgin's like lab assistant while he was still alive, for years, but also like a spy for Church of Scientology. So weird stuff. And that's who's in charge of the Shulgin Foundation now. They are obviously like really heavily involved with MAPS, and we should try to
I'd like to hear more about maps.
Okay, we should
on maps. We don't have to do it today if you're not ready.
No,
but
we got it. No, we got to get. I know we're at like 90 minutes, but we got to get into it
it's
a
all
little
good,
bit.
man.
If that's okay.
We can go another half hour if you want. It's good.
Cool, man. No, this is. I mean, like I said, this is why it took me like so long to try to get ready for this episode, because I'm like, man, how do I even like get all this information into like one thing, into like a way to present it coherently? And I've already missed so much of like what's in my notes. But let's talk about MAPS. MAPS was founded by a guy named Rick Doblin. We mentioned him because he is a graduate also of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, which is kind of like an epicenter of a lot of this stuff. And his career, like he was from Dallas. He in Dallas happens to be like after like Shulgin went back and synthesized MDMA, it kind of like became popularized, and I don't know like through what exact channels, but in Dallas, in like this club scene in Dallas in the early 80s. That's when like it became termed ecstasy, right, in these dance clubs. It was legal at the time, and this is like the culture around MDMA as like like a party drug, and like something that's like outside of the laboratory, outside of clinical offices and stuff like this. It was in Dallas, and Rick Doblin became like a big distributor in Dallas. This is his background. He's a drug dealer, all right. And I couldn't say precisely where that he was getting it from, but we can say for a fact that like the biggest like MDMA trafficking networks, like historically, are via like are via like laboratories in the Netherlands, and like Israeli mafia, Mossad, Israeli mafia, whatever networks, distributed worldwide. Like they have largely controlled the MDMA trade. So I think it's probably safe to say that this is Rick Doblin is part of this network. CIA, Mossad, mafia, whatever. I think it's pretty like safe to to reckon that is like actually his provenance. So he formed MAPS in, I believe, 1986, around the same time that MDMA was scheduled, by the DEA, by the DEA, and became illegal. And so they've like obviously been the biggest proponents for legalizing psychedelics, and psychedelic research and stuff, and most of the the things that they have like tailored their research to, a lot of it is for soldiers, for PTSD. Like it stands to reason, like this is something that people are largely in support of. It's like something that people can like, in the public, you can get people who are like otherwise adverse to to drugs, saying like, well, if it's something that we can use to like help soldiers and veterans and stuff like this, it's a good cover for what they want to do. So they've been doing that kind of stuff for a long time. They actually like have used, kind of like going back to what we were talking about before, to kind of like use this stuff in a way to kind of like abate PTSD, to like make people like inured to like the horrors of war, or to make like super soldiers. In one of the things that they have like done recently is a trial with their Israeli branch, using MDMA to like cure or treat PTSD for 400 individual survivors of October 7th, the whatever you want to call it, the attack. So they're using MDMA to treat those people. And they recently, so they spun off like a commercial, for, so MAPS is nonprofit, although they have raised an insane amount of money, some like $140 million over the years, like a lot of money for a nonprofit, right? And a lot of it is coming from some like really serious like oligarch politically connected people. The Rockefellers have given a lot of money to MAPS. Richard Rockefeller, who was also who was a doctor, he is the son of David Rockefeller. He was he was a doctor who also a graduate of Harvard, and he was a big supporter. I think he was like a board member of MAPS, and after he died, like his kids have gotten involved with the board at MAPS, and they're giving tons of money. The Rockefeller Brothers Foundation is giving money to MAPS. Nicholas Pritzker, one of the Pritzker cousins, he was the I believe Nick Pritzker was actually the CEO of Hyatt at one point. He is one of the big supporters of MAPS. Elon Musk has given them a lot of money. The Mercer Family Foundation. So, that's like Rebecca Mercer, the daughter of Robert Mercer, who, they were funding, all of like the MAGA, Breitbart, Cambridge Analytica, all of that stuff, right?
Okay.
Like they are heavily funding MAPS. So, people that you like wouldn't necessarily think of as like these, trippy, psychedelic bros. Like, no, it's it's these oligarch, families, it's these billionaires, it's conservatives, lot of really strange bedfellows in there that are putting up the money for MAPS. And what's interesting is so they spun off a for-profit division, and it's called Lycos, and they have been doing like MDMA therapy trials, and they actually got rejected by the FDA in 2024. And this was, is this something that you heard about, Jordan? Because it's actually a pretty big deal.
I think so. I think so.
And
it does sound a little familiar. 2004?
2024, like it just happened.
Sorry, that's what I meant. 2024. Yeah. My mistake.
Yeah, it happened really recently. They have been doing these clinical trials for years, and this was in like the phase 2 or phase 3 of the trials. And they were like right on the verge of getting like FDA approval for MDMA therapy that would have been actually like something that they could have then like brought to market through Lycos, and made insane amounts of money on, right? And it was actually David Nichols, the guy that we were talking about before, who worked for Eli Lilly, who's a professor at Purdue University in Indiana, who was making, he was synthesizing the MDMA for these trials. So again, the closed network with all these chemists and these institutions and stuff. But what happened was, and they, I don't know, because some of this stuff is classified and confidential, the FDA records of like why they denied them the approval. But we know for a fact, because this came out, that in the clinical trials, there's some pretty serious abuse, and this was directly like related with people who were therapists that were administering the therapy, like as actual clinicians for the trials, but that were like also pretty heavily involved in like the organization of MAPS from like a on the nonprofit side of it, right? And so it was this woman named Megan Buisson. She was a volunteer in the clinical trials, and she was out in BC, and doing clinical trials with this couple. It was Richard Jensen and Donna Dyer. They're a married couple, and they were administering the MDMA treatment protocol, for the clinical trials for Lycos. And basically, like they were, this is a woman who had like severe, physical trauma, sexual trauma, like, horrible things that happened to her, and they gave her MDMA in, you know, the context of this clinical trial, and she was like freaking out. And like, instead of, you know, providing like a normal supportive environment, this Jensen guy, and there are videotapes of this, like, you know, like this is in the public record. He puts her on a bed in their house, puts her on a bed and lays down on top of her. And while she's like experiencing this, like, you know, recurrence of like a, you know, past sexual trauma, and she's like yelling at him, like, get off, like, get off of me. And he's like, no. And he starts like holding her down, like on a bed, dude. This is all on, you know, film.
That's
Yeah.
traumatic, dude.
Oh,
Holy
dude, it is crazy. And so, you know, she was like freaking out, and he's just like restraining her, like literally laying on top of her, touching her, you know. And then in like all the other like sessions that they had, he's like touching her and doing like weird stuff. And the wife is too, like his wife is in on it. And
Oh.
ultimately, yeah, oh yeah, no, it's really, really fucked up. And like ultimately after the trials finish, she ends up like going to live with them at their house and being kind of like their assistant, and they're like taking advantage of her sexually. And you know, like she's you know, she's like under mind control of these people. You know, they had used you know, these like MDMA sessions to like, you know, like re-traumatize her, and you know, basically turn her into like I don't know, you know, some kind of like, you know, mind program, kind of like sex slave. And she basically you know, was like living with them, and in a you know, relationship with them. She eventually tried to like get away from them, and this Dr. Jensen guy was like gaslighting her, you know, saying, you know, like telling her that she was like crazy, and that, you know, he hadn't done anything wrong and all this stuff. And you know, eventually she got away, and broke free of them, and filed ethics complaints against MAPS. And like, this is probably like, you know, what led to the you know, the FDA, like, you know, rejecting their trials for MDMA therapy. And this, you know, points to like, you know, the pitfalls of this kind of therapy, is that it can be like really used to take advantage of people, and not just
yeah,
like,
dude.
not just in the session, but like on an ongoing basis. And you know, that you know, people become like attached to these therapists, and you know, that they're being like mind fucked, and they are you know, being taken advantage of, like physically, sexually, and monetarily too. You know, it's this is just from like a personal note, you know, because you know, you talk about like the you know, abuses of these facilitators. And you know, like I was saying at the start, you know, I've been involved in, you know, a lot of different aspects of, you know, like, you know, psychedelics. And you know, was involved you know, with a group here, like in Oregon and California, you know, that were like, you know, part of this, you know, network that goes down to, you know, that is part of this Peruvian network, you know, with like one of the biggest, like, you know, most renowned ayahuasca shamans in the world. And but you know, has like followers here in the United States, and you know, people that he's trained. And you know, they have they do like ceremonies, you know, all over the West Coast. And you know, these are people who, you know, they've recruited a lot of like you know, powerful people, you know, from what I understand, like in Los Angeles. You know, they've had like Oprah, and you know, they've had like people like that, you know, in these circles. I've, you know, been told that like Bill Gates, you know, has been in their ceremonies, stuff like this, like people of like extreme means, and you know, and influence. And the craziest thing that I saw, you know, it just like in the groups that I had sat with, and this is years and years ago, when I personally like experienced this, it really wigged me out. And it's, one of the things that really turned me off to a lot of this stuff. But they were doing, these, it was like a straight up like MLM, like pyramid scheme. And it was like right after like ceremony, they were telling people they really targeted the women. And they had said, okay, we're gonna have this like women's gifting circle. And the way it works is, we have like all the women that are like involved in this group. And if we invite you in, you've got to pay us $7,000. Right. And we're going to like chop it up and split it up, between us. But when like bring in new people, when we bring in new people, you're going to get a share of their $7,000. Like literally, like a pyramid Ponzi scheme.
Baby.
And it was so like disturbing because they would present people with this like after ceremony, when people were still like definitely under the effects of the drugs. And in an ayahuasca ceremony is not just like the drugs, like the facilitators, most of them are these insanely talented musicians, right? So it's a big performance, and there's songs and there's like instruments, and like it's a big production. And when you get done with the ceremony and everybody's like together, and it's this like it's this weird bonding thing, people feel like they're part of a group, people feel highly like engaged with the group, spiritually engaged, whatever. And they're like approaching people and being like, oh, we want to invite you into our gifting circle, and all it's going to cost you is $7,000. That's $7,000 in like 2013 money. So I don't know what they ask for now. I'm sure it's more. This is still going on. And they actually have like tax exempt status now. It's like a
Who does these?
This organization, yeah, they're like incorporated, like as a church now. And so I'm sure that it's like it's big money. I don't want to like say their name or anything like that, but
Sure.
some people might be able to figure out who I'm talking about. But it's not UDV and it's not Santa Daime, but anyways, it's another organization. And yeah, like big money. And like I saw people just being like, oh, thank you, like being like, thank you for this opportunity, and just like opening up their pocketbooks and just I mean it was really crazy, man. And so I think that my point here being that that's not like necessarily like a physical or sexual abuse, but it's like certainly like like an abuse of trust, and a means of like mind controlling people. And I've seen it like in practice. I also saw like in the course of like being involved in these groups, like definitely especially vulnerable women being like taken advantage of too, by older men, who are like, oh, I'll mentor you and I'll be your, spiritual guide and this and that. Like, I've seen a lot of this stuff. So, I think that this is, like a big aspect of what you see in these, communities, in these circles, is like people are, taking advantage of other people. It's a way for, people who are like, have their minds open in certain ways and are, like easy prey. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I hate to put it in those terms, but like that's what I see.
That's yeah, dude, that's the way it is. I mean, it's not a matter of not wanting and putting it away that doesn't sound. It's just the way it is. Yeah.
And to like as kind of like a final point is, it's not just like other people that you're opening yourself up to, but like that this is potentially kind of going back to aliens, spirits, whatever entities. like you're opening yourself up to something else that's out there, and maybe not in like lower doses, like microdosing is, it's different. But in like higher doses of just about every single one of these, at least, tryptamines for certain, and mescaline, I would say as well, maybe not, so many of the other phenylethylamines, but most of the powerful tryptamines, like you are gonna encounter some kind of like entity out there, when you like interface with high doses, your heroic doses and stuff like that. Like it's a feature, it's a fact. And like, I don't know what this stuff is, and I don't know like where it exists, or
Right.
these are like aliens, these are whatever, dude. I mean, it's a real thing, and people are subject to their influence, and I mean, people like come back from these experiences, and they've had these contacts, and they are like influenced by whatever they've made contact with in these like realms. And I don't know, like maybe they're benevolent, maybe they're not benevolent. And, like how does it relate with, all of this disclosure and, all of this new UFO stuff and AI and all of these things. And
Right.
we didn't even scratch the surface of like, psychedelics in Silicon Valley and, all of this stuff. And
Fair
that's,
enough.
that's,
Yeah.
that's going to be a whole other thing, because, I didn't even get there, but like, yeah, the AI and the psychedelics like are really going hand in hand. And like what people are seeing in one realm, like what they can be like influenced by in a in another realm. I mean, if that makes sense, like
Yeah.
the convergence of like their psychedelic visions and something that they're interfacing with in a GPT or on social media. And how potentially like even how like they could now can use devices to like pick up on like biometrics and potentially be like reading some of your data of while you're having these experiences, to be able to like feed you AI stuff to influence you later. These are things that I think that we have to be really aware of. So that's probably a good place to wrap up. If you think, if you
Oh
got any
man.
other thoughts or questions or anything like that.
No, that's man, you nailed it, man. I mean, as for my question, I mean, you fucking nailed it all around. But and the chat, I mean, I didn't want to interrupt, but the chat throughout, I tried to throw out some comments for you to see. uh they're just loving it, man. I appreciate your hard work on this, man. I don't think I have any questions right now. If I do, I'll kind of jot them down, and we can carry it over if we do a part two or something. That way, the audience can benefit from it as well. But no, man. Whew, like you said, it's just a lot of connections, a lot of names, and lots of companies, and people hiding behind companies and names and brands and stuff. Whew, it's just
And
wild, man. I commend you that you're able to break that stuff down and keep that stuff together like other. Just trying to think of some, like William Ramsey's pretty good at that, or Ian Carroll, Ryan Dawson, and yeah, it's a great skill to have, because it's good to it's one thing to know like the general history and background of stuff, but yeah, to be able to nail down names and stuff like that, it's dates and stuff, it's really helpful. So
this is something that like, man, when you start kind of like seeing these threads that weave through, when you start seeing these like threads that weave through all this and all these people and all these organizations and things that are kind of like hidden, and you can like draw your own conclusions if you look at it like analytically, and see like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history that we can read that, but man, there's so much more that like is pretty obvious, when you look at it, and especially like, I think, one of the things that I've like kind of clocked that I've never heard anybody else talk about is like these connections with the Royal Society, and with Sandoz, and with the Huxleys and the Perutz family, and like, literature, and the science, and these drugs, before, like way before LSD was officially like discovered. That's just such a crazy story, and that that they wrote these books about it, and that they were telling people like years before it happened. That's just like it's totally mind-blowing. And so dude, I really appreciate it. And just I did see a lot of cool comments, and communications that you shared from the chat. I didn't see the whole chat or anything in my view, but like, man, I really appreciate you guys following along and being engaged. And it was great to have Adam in the chat, and definitely would like to maybe have Adam like get with us sometime. I know this is something that he's interested in. And really appreciate Anna Nicole Wordsmith, for dropping in. She's awesome. Give her a follow. Shout out Anna. Yeah, if anybody's interested, like, or has any like thoughts that they'd like to share privately, you can feel free to contact me on my Twitter at accountable to me. You can DM me. I will get back at this is stuff that I'm like really interested in. And if anybody has any additional perspective or information or leads, like get with me. I totally appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. We both love hearing. We love, yeah, we like to feedback, and we like to kind of connect with other people and hear what other people have to say. I mean, that's how you and me met, and that's how we hooked up, and look where we are now. Yeah, so that's cool. So yeah, much appreciated to the people in the audience, and the listeners, and the people that do reach out. Yeah, we definitely have some very interesting ideas for some episodes for you and me to do, as well as some that we spoke to Adam about. So yeah, that'll be really cool. Let's see, for the future, we have Wednesday. I think our next show will probably be Wednesday. We'll have Ethan Indigo from the Occult Rejects coming on.
Oh, nice.
We on June the 2nd, we might have something booked before then, but I'm just trying to think of everything I can remember. June the 2nd, we have a gentleman coming on to talk about serial killer patterns through archetypes. What else? Let's see. I think we can share it. I think it's pretty safe to say. Yeah, I think it's safe to say. The individual who was the mistress, dominatrix for Brian Nome, Christy Nome's husband. She says she's willing to come on and talk about that experience, so that should be very interesting. She seems very down to earth, and fun. So I think it could be a fun time, interesting time. Yeah.
When is that? Did you have
I was
date?
thinking maybe I asked her about the first or second week of June, so I think we'll shoot for somewhere around there. And then I think on the 6th, I have to connect with you first, obviously, but JJ's ready to come back on the 6th. He let me know.
That. Yeah,
so we could, cool.
Yeah, let's do that.
Cool. And yeah, and then the rejects are coming back. Austin Wade Picard is gonna come back. He said the first week of June, so I asked him about the 3rd, 4th, or 5th. So we'll see what he says. And yeah. So a few other new people, and then some people I'd like to bring back. Bart Sabrell says he's going to come back in June or July, whatever we pick. So I'd like to bring Adam back, and I'd like to do another kind of NASA space moon episode before we bring him back. And yeah, I think we'll have some cool stuff for the summer. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a snapshot of what's coming up. So anything else, my friend?
Oh no, you know, I didn't mention him at all, man. I know that me and Adam, like off air, had, you know, talked about it a little bit, but Paul Stamets, we gotta get him on so we can do it, you know, on air, like, you know, like put him on blast a little bit.
Yes, that is another one. I'm gonna I'd like to do that this summer to get him on. So,
we gotta put that dude on blast, and
yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Let's see if Adam will get with us, because I think it'll blow his mind. Yeah,
for sure.
So,
that'd be cool.
Yeah,
man.
so cool, dude.
Anything else?
Thanks. No, man, that was fun. I'm, you know, shoot, like I said, I only got like through a fraction of the material. There's so much more, so we will like revisit this. We'll get it
Good.
on. So
that's cool, man. I think that's good. I think the people will enjoy that. Everyone here seems to be down for that. So for those here, yeah, look forward to that. And for those who listen to this after the fact, yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll definitely let you know when that's coming up. But yeah, in the meantime, if you can do what you can to help us get up to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube and help us bump up our numbers on Rumble. I'm going to wait until the next show, maybe to give away, or to no pun intended, give away the details. But we do have a brand new iPad and a case for it to give away. So I think I'm going to connect that to just getting some people to subscribe. So make sure you subscribe, get some people to subscribe, because it will help you in the draw. And I'll make sure any subscriptions that people that are already subscribed, or any people that you get subscribed from now, just keep the receipts, and I will grant that in the raffle, so to speak. Yeah, I'll give more details on that next time, but yeah, we got a brand new iPad to give away, so yeah, stay tuned on that. And
that's a big come up for somebody.
Yeah, man. I mean, fuck,
I want to win.
Yeah, man, there you go. Maybe you can win. No. But yeah, other than that, also make sure to check out the Scott Horton Academy. Brother was on Joe Rogan the other day, so that's cool for him. Go to scotthortonacademy.com/divulgence for a discount for you guys. And I think that's it for now.
We didn't even dish on Rogan, man. Jeez. There's a lot we didn't get to.
We did it, eh? Shit, I didn't even think of that. Well, we that is something that we do want to get into. And,
big time.
I think Adam's interested in that too, and because
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to talk about there with Rogan, so that's something else we can chew on. But yeah, in the meantime, do what you go make sure you're subscribed. Rumble, YouTube, if you are, then get someone else subscribed, and like I said, we'll share some details about the giveaway next time, and sending you guys the best. It was this was fun, man. So I wish we had I was gonna say we got to get like some sound effects, because I wish we had like give you a nice round of applause, because that was that was awesome.
You know what I just thought of? That was funny. You know, wish everybody like a happy Memorial Day, but like Memorial Day, we do the show where it's like, you know, everything is about like PTSD and veterans, and you know, like if war is bad, war is sad, give them the drugs. Give them the drugs.
Yeah, True that, man. I forgot it was Memorial Day. So yeah, happy Memorial Day, everyone. and I hope everyone enjoyed the enhanced games. So So
there you go, dude. That's your boy Christian Angermeyer.
There you go.
Buy some ATI Life Sciences stock, I guess. I don't know.
Love it, man. Love it. Well, yeah, props again, brother. So thank you for that. Stay tuned for a part 2, and yeah, all the best to you guys. We'll see you guys. We'll see you guys on Wednesday. Peace and love.